As ever, we are not. Okay, I think we are live.
Okay.
Who knows? I think we're live. Hello and welcome to a fireside chat that I'm so excited to be having between myself and Brandi Richardson, Codesmith alum, Black Engineering Scholarship recipient, senior engineer at Microsoft, technical product manager at Microsoft, and now just moved to Google, so we'll learn about that. But also invaluable mentor in the Codesmith community for now 3 or 4 years. I think Brandi went in to Codesmith in 2020, and an incredible journey that Brandi has shared in Profiles in Tech, a collection of interviews that I've loved reading, and Brandi has committed so much to the Codesmith community, is a significant leader in the technology space, as I say, both at Microsoft and at Google. And I hope that today we'll be able to have a wide-ranging conversation together. And so, Brandi, a wonderful, warm welcome to you for our fireside chat.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, I'm always here to help and support Codesmith. I always tell people Codesmith changed my life, so I'm excited.
Brandi was just telling me before we came on that that she sent multiple people to Codesmith afterwards, and I do, including your brother.
Yeah, my brother Jeffrey Richardson, he graduated last year, and now he's a software engineer at Humana. And I had a friend graduate. She's a software engineer at Zoom. I have another friend that went through the program. He works at IBM. So it's at least five people.
It's
total.
Amazing. And have you received a sweater for that, Brandi?
A sweater? No.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yes, there we go. Embarrassing on our part. But I think we can really use the time together. And I hope, like, I'm looking at I think this is the camera to look at. I think we can use the time together. Like, if you read through profiles on Brandi, if you have watched other panel discussions with Brandi where she has spoken and given advice, the advice we get as an audience has been highly insightful and pushing one, I think, to be comfortable to be one's best self and not kind of make apologies for it. And so I hope we get a chance to really dive into some of that advice today. So people on the live stream, please send your questions that Brandi and myself, where appropriate, can field. Because if you've been on any other panels and heard Brandi's advice, you've heard things that you need to hear as an engineer, as a person, that can empower, but also give you specific techniques to build your confidence, but also give you specific techniques to navigate the tech industry, the professional software engineering space. And so I hope we can get to all of those. And so why don't we start, Brandi, with a little bit of kind of context, get a chance to share that journey you took from Delta. And as I said, I know others have seen it and read it, and you've shared it before, but just that journey you took, maybe even, through beyond Codesmith. So less a kind of woo Codesmith and more like your personal journey that you took, just to give people context as we start to, explore all those topics.
Yes. So I was working at Delta Airlines at the beginning of 2020. And obviously the pandemic happened and Delta was, it impacted tremendously because flights and stuff weren't available during that time. And I was furloughed, and I always wanted to get into tech. Tech was like, I don't know, it was always something that I had a desire to do, but I just never felt like I could personally get into it. Right. Honestly, I didn't see many women as software engineers, and I definitely didn't see any Black women as software engineers. So I was like, is this really a space for me? But I was like, okay, you are furloughed, you have nothing else to lose, try it out. And I actually started using things like Free Code Camp and Codecademy to teach myself how to code. And then from there, I was looking at boot camps. And I originally was going to go to another boot camp, which I won't name, but a friend that I, oh, should I name it?
No, the boo was for the other boot camp.
Oh, okay. So I originally was going to go to another boot camp, but I reached out to one of their alumni and they were like, honestly, I regret ever going to that boot camp. I graduated as I spent all this money. I graduated as a junior engineer and now I only make like 60K. They were like, if I could do it over, I would go to a boot camp called Codesmith. And I had at the time never heard of Codesmith because there are certain boot camps out there that honestly just accept any and all people. So you may hear about them more. Whereas like Codesmith was like this kind of elite, like in my opinion, very like prestigious boot camp. And this was very much more like selective in terms of like their requirements, in terms of getting accepted. And so I looked up Codesmith and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like next level. I went to one of the pair programming sessions and I went to one of the workshops that Codesmith hosted. And honestly, I had no idea what they were talking about because Codesmith, of course, does this thing where it's like under the hood. And so you're not just quote unquote learning how to code, you're really taking these objects or functions apart and understanding what's happening underneath the hood. And that for me was again, I was already new to coding in general, but that for me was a new concept. But I started going to the workshops, I started going to the pair programming sessions. And I just honestly fell in love with the community with Codesmith. I mean, I did CSX, which is, of course, Codesmith's like in-house prep tutorial, in-house prep course. And I did it with other people who were a part of CSX Slack channel. And so Codesmith has this thing called CSX, which is essentially the community for their prep course. And you join the Slack channel and you just get introduced to so many other people who are also trying to get into Codesmith. And you can pair program with people. And so, I was doing like group sessions with others. And for me, it was like really the community piece that really sold me on Codesmith. But also, let's be honest, it was also the outcomes that also sold me. Because I mean, obviously, you want to get your money's worth. And for me, when I was looking at Codesmith reviews, I also reached out to Codesmith alumni and seeing how they went from like teachers or nurses or recruiters to mid-level software engineers making great money for me was like, oh yes, this is what I wanted to do. And so, that was I guess that's like high level, my journey. I can also go into more detail as well.
So Brandi, I think it's fascinating. So I think that and again, I don't want to get too bogged down in kind of some of these pieces because there's so much but to get to, I don't want to kind of get my stuff in the way here, but talk to me about that, I guess, overlay, that juxtaposition of going under the hood and understanding things deeply. And this is, again, not in our kind of official list of questions, but going under the hood, understanding things deeply, and yet at the same time also needing to, as you say, kind of build a community, get oneself on board, get other people on board, but get oneself on board. You described the CSX community. That's kind of like we're going deep, but then we're also going high level. When I think about the role you have now, to me, I hope software engineering in theory is some of that. I was actually just writing an answer to the AMA I did on Reddit yesterday, and I was like, I think being a modern engineer is about balancing between those different, they call it abstraction levels, or I guess domains, like the people and the tech system, and then like the individual bug. But I suspect that where it's really that is the kind of role you're doing now, this technical product manager, where you are truly having to balance like a set of different levels of abstraction, like literally fixing, individual lines of code while also having to develop product strategy, while also having to get a team aligned. How much is that mirrored, that from day one, your ability to kind of go deep, but also go to those higher level? How much is that mirrored in the technical management, even more than perhaps in software engineering?
Yeah, I would say it's very mirrored. I mean, one, because when I say I think Codesmith did a good job of that balance, right? It's like you're going under the hood, you're trying to understand this complex problem. Essentially what you're doing is taking this huge problem and you're just breaking it apart and then understanding what's happening and then finding a solution to put it back together. And to be honest, that is that describes my technical program manager role to the T. Like, I'm getting problems from left and right, and I'm taking the problems apart. I'm understanding, getting to the root of the problem, and then I'm finding a solution and putting it back together. And so, but then also with that, so I think that was one of the things that I really appreciated about like going under the hood with these workshops, because it's not simply like, hey, how do you solve this problem? But it's more so like, no, I want to teach you how to problem solve. I want to teach you how to think, right? And I think when I think about what makes you a good software engineer, what makes you a good technical program manager, it's not how well you code. It's not how well you can like, I don't know, like write code. What makes you a good software engineer is how well you can problem solve, like period. It's not simply like how well I can code. It's like, no, how can you problem solve? And I think when I think about,
I'm not even sure sometimes what, forgive me, I'm not even sure sometimes what it means to be good at writing code. And that might be like a blank for me, but I'm also quite proud that I don't like, I sometimes say, you know, when people ask like, you know, talk about your experience with give a technology, I'm like, well, you don't just know a bit of the technology, you've used it to solve a given problem.
Exactly.
But that's a massive, so I do think one of the frustrations, and you say you worked in talent development as well, right? Like one of the frustrations I do sometimes have, and maybe you faced it, is you know that people know it implicitly in leadership and people know it implicitly in roles. I don't know if always recruiters understand that. And it's also really hard to assess for. So they ask questions like, tell me what you've done with Node. And it's like, no, tell me some problems of which Node might have been a solution.
I agree. And like, even for people that go through Codesmith, I think my encouragement is always, because Codesmith is just a very hard like program in and of itself. And people are like, oh, I'm not doing good on certain assessments. And I'm like, wait, let's not get caught up in like how well you're writing code. I focus on like, are you a good problem solver? How do you think about the problem? And so like, I would say for me, my day-to-day job involves so much of problem solving. And whether I was a software engineer, as a technical program manager, it's all about how do we solve these problems? Because even when you're writing code, there's like this running joke where people say, most software engineers only write code for 10% of the time. The other 90% is you figuring out why your code isn't working. And like, that's just like, I'm writing code like maybe 10%. The other 90% is like, why isn't my code working? Like, that's really what you're doing. It's like problem solving. And like, I think people really, I don't know if people always understand that, because sometimes people focus so much on being like a good code writer. And I personally don't even understand what that is. And I'm all about like problem solving. I'm all about strategies. I'm all about how do you think, and also how do you technically communicate the solutions that you're trying to solve for as well. That's also a huge piece. And so when I think about my journey into Codesmith and my job right now, those are two main things that I feel like are mirrored. One, how do I problem solve? How do I think? But then two, how do I technically communicate the solutions that I'm trying to solve for, you know? So those are, I would say, two main things of how it's mirrored.
Well, how do you do that? So when you talk about the technical communication, there was a great question on the AMA last night on Reddit where someone said, hey, look, Codesmith focuses so much on technical communication, but I'm ESL. I only really speak English in the workplace. I don't even really speak it elsewhere. You know, am I blocked from doing so? And I was pitching in the answer that, well, a heck of a lot of ways to communicate, but like in a practical sense, how do you, and let's get like specific, how do you go about getting your conception of this problem, of maybe a technology system? How do you go about doing that? How did you about doing that at Microsoft? You know, what were the practical steps that, and maybe if you're sharing with people who are coming out of Codesmith and going, or just engineers in general, how can they get better at getting their mental conception model of whatever the problem is into the brains of other people? How did you do it?
Yes. So one, I want to speak to the person that, you know, mentioned like, hey, like, you know, I'm only working with ESL like in my job. So technical communication isn't just verbally, right? A huge thing in the tech world, especially working at Microsoft, was technical documentation. So it had nothing to do with simply me talking. It had everything to do with me documenting and writing, right? And so it's not simply like I'm verbally communicating. It's like, no, I'm documenting every single step, whether it's pseudocode, whether it's on my project briefs, whether it's like an actual technical documentation document that we have, right? We have tons of them for every single project that we worked on. And I think too that when I heard the person that mentioned like, hey, English isn't my first language, immediately I think of like, this is what it means to be an empathy-driven engineer. And that's what I identify as, right? I identify as like, when I'm writing code, when I'm like communicating, I'm not just communicating code to computers, right? I'm communicating code to people, to human beings. And so because of that, I'm making sure like when I write code, when I document, that it is something that any and everybody can understand. Not, and again, when you're writing code, people think, oh, I'm a software engineer, I'm writing code to computers so they can understand. No, I'm writing code to human beings, right? And so I think for me, that's why I love calling myself an empathy-driven engineer.
Yep.
Like everything that I do, I lead with empathy, including for those where, hey, English may not be their primary language. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to technically document in a way that everybody can understand. And so it's not just verbally, it's also the way that we communicate when we're actually typing or writing, out our documentation as well. I wanted to just speak on that personally, but I forgot your other question. Sorry.
No, that's honestly what I was thinking as you were speaking. I was like, flipping heck, it's very satisfying and inspiring is overused as a word, but it's very satisfying to hear the emphasis. And of course, that's the reality. Is what you're describing is the reality of what makes a great engineer. But I do need to. So I have this little clip from my talk on front-end masters that is junior developer can work on problems they've seen before with tools they've used before. Mid-level problems they haven't seen before with tools they haven't used before. Senior can enable and empower others to solve problems with tools they haven't used before and problems they haven't seen before. And I say it and I feel it, but when I shared it, I didn't share it, but Front End Masters shared it. I looked and it had thousands of reposts by VPs of engineering, lead engineers. And the worst comment was, should be more like this, not always true. But sometimes there is one has to constantly harp on this, because as you say, for whatever reason, there is this sometimes I don't want to say fetishization. So let's say over celebration of obscurity, of almost obfuscation of oh, it's so hard. People love that, or some people love to kind of almost celebrate that. And doing what you're describing is actually a vulnerable position sometimes, because actually people often make a lot of the sense of their value by, no, you wouldn't understand this. And it's actually quite vulnerable to say, no, you can, because it could be perceived as lowering one's own value, right?
Absolutely.
So how does one navigate that?
I was going to speak to that too, because this is something that I've learned within the tech community, specifically in tech, right? It's technology that you're dealing with. People, and I say this with so much love, a lot of people I've realized in tech, they love to sound smarter than what they really are. That's just a thing in tech. Everybody loves to use these huge words. People love to talk about these huge concepts that nobody understands, because in some ways it kind of makes you feel, I don't know, it's like a weird, I'm more elite than you. And I don't personally agree with that, right? I'm really big on, if you cannot explain something in layman terms, then you probably actually don't understand it. And specifically as a software engineer and as a technical program manager, you also have to realize that you're not just working with software engineers. A huge part, again, of being a good software engineer, it's also, how do I collaborate with other people in other disciplines, right? And other roles. So for instance, as a software engineer, as a TPM, I'm working with designers. I'm working with business operation people. I'm working with product designers, people who may not have all the technical jargon. And so if I'm not able to simplify something for them so they can understand, that actually can hinder my job. And so this idea that I have to use these large terms to make me sound smarter can actually be a hindrance, especially when you're working for certain companies where collaboration is so big. And honestly, for most companies, collaboration is so big, right? Innovation and technology is all about collaborating with other people. And so if you cannot explain something where other people in other roles, right, understand, that can be a hindrance. Because your stakeholders a lot of times won't be software engineers. A lot of times your stakeholders, and stakeholders are people that you work with, partner with, they're going to be people that work in other roles who are not as technical as you. So I really want to
So Brandi, how do you instill that instinct? Because what you're describing there, note to our live audience, like this sounds, trivializing, but like Brandi did the thing of saying stakeholders and then went other, people who for whom it mattered, whatever the phrase, you did it better than me, but explained it, because it's almost, I don't want to say instinctive level, it's a fundamental desire to want to ensure every person follows. So how the heck do you instill, because you clearly do it instinctively, as in like literally, I don't know if people notice, but literally like there, you use the word stakeholder. I'm sure people know what stakeholder means, but not everyone does. And so my question would be is, how do you instill that instinct that seems to come so naturally to you? How does one instill that in people, especially where some of them, they really did start. I like to distinguish between like people who've had technology wielded upon them and for their whole lives, or people for whom they've always been the wielders of technology. And one of the things I love most about, and that's why I really do think just boot camps as opposed to just Codesmith, is it allows people who've experienced tech being wielded on them, a bad user experience, a lack of empathy for the users, bad documentation, all these sorts of things, which is the default a lot of the time, to now be the ones doing the wielding. But they can do it, in my theory, with more empathy. But how do you, how it may seem instinctive to you, but like, how does one make people care about that, especially when there is this celebration sometimes by almost an instinctive level of obscurity? I don't have the answer.
I would say one thing that has helped me a lot is honestly like mentoring and teaching other junior engineers. And I think what happens is, like, if I'm mentoring, right, or teaching people a different concept, by like I'm forced to simplify something. And so I think it's on one side when people say like, you always want to be around people smarter than you. It's like, yes, but at the same time, you also want to take that knowledge and say like, hey, I'm gaining all this knowledge. Now, how do I also go back and pour into others in the same way that people have poured into me? And I think too, that also helps me to reassure that, hey, I'm actually understanding this concept a lot more because I have to teach it. I have to break it down. And so I would say, because one thing about tech, you cannot, this whole self-made thing, that does not exist in tech. You have to have community. When you think about anybody, I would say most software engineers that I know of who work at companies, it only happened because they knew somebody. So community is so important. Being able to go back and mentor and pour into others, that's so important to your career. And that's also qualities that people look at when it comes to promotion. So one of the reasons why I got promoted at my last company is because I was really big on mentoring junior engineers. And again, that helped me as a senior software engineer, because again, I have to constantly relearn the concepts or like refresh the concepts because I'm teaching them to other people. But then two, I'm breaking them down. I'm breaking the concepts down in a way that everybody can understand. And it was beneficial for me because I got promoted because of that. And so I would say mentoring helps when it comes to that, making sure that you're pouring out to others in the same way that people poured out to you. And then again, that helps on your job because managers and directors, they look for that. They look for leadership qualities. Like,
because it makes you better at the job, as you said. It makes you
better at the job. It does.
But also it stops you from ever running away from the cold, hard reality of just how demanding understanding, jumping between those layers is. It's because actually, I'm not saying it's being a leader as you are is not easier. It's not easier. It's very hard, but it's a different type of hard to the hard of understanding that specific concept for someone earlier in their career. And they're honestly equally hard in different ways. But you get really comfortable with one and you start to undervalue the other. And that is where you get this like alienation between the person who's leading and the person who's doing a lot of it, who's like, wait, no, you don't really appreciate. And you start to get leaders going, so what were you doing for the 10 hours? And you're like, well,
Yes.
I was hitting a block for 10 hours. And I'm afraid that's how it is. But you see, even engineering leaders who've lived that forget if they don't keep doing what you're describing.
Yes. And it also, I think, makes you adaptable, which is another huge quality that when we talk about, I know the word that I know that was on like our list was like modern software engineer, right? Like, how do you continue to be a modern software engineer? Teaching and mentoring, because that makes you adaptable, right? It makes you say like, hey, the way that I explain this concept to one person may be different from how I have to explain it to another. And I think being a software engineer is all about adapting, because things are always evolving. The people that you work with is always changing. And so the way that you explain concepts may change. And sometimes designers I have to explain concepts with designers using like visuals. Whereas like with user researchers, they love graphs and charts, right? Because they're all about the data. And so the way that I'm explaining certain concepts changes depending on who my audience is. And so that's where being adaptable, is really important. And again, I go back to mentoring and teaching. That keeps me more adaptable, because I'm forced to change the way I speak and communicate depending on my audience.
And I think it's early days for yourself and myself as well, all of us. But like, it's early days for us in that these organizations, like the Googles, having leaders rise up, as you're describing, you're more and more with these values. Like, we're still early. I don't know. We're just saying we're just early days in our careers still. Already, the things you're describing. Yes. So just think what's to come. Like, to take the things you're describing into leadership, ever more senior in the years ahead, is really exciting. And okay, we've got some great audience questions. I've been told. I've just been told. So let's look through really great audience questions.
Will, can you give me 1 second? My charger isn't working, and I need to go get my other charger. I'm so sorry.
So then I can use this, people, to read through some of these questions.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay, so we have yeah, truth sayer, absolutely. Yeah, Ifran, right. I mean, there's writing clean code, there's best practices. It's never to dismiss those, right? It's to rather it's the ability and capacity to seek those, not the having them in itself. Can one be too old to start a career in tech? I'm in my early 50s. Absolutely not. I would strongly, Sunshine Fee, I would strongly suggest reaching out to, there you go. You got a lovely message here from the team. Okay. Hello, Brandi back. Okay, so let's go through. I don't know if you can see these questions as well, but we've got
I can.
Okay, we've got many. Oh, I'm not. Yeah, here's one from Bradley. What? From Brandi's senior position at Microsoft, what does Brandi look for when hiring in software engineers, and what will companies like Microsoft and obviously now Google want in the coming years, given the changing tools available? What do you think?
Okay, so the question was, what do companies look for in terms of hiring? Was that correct?
The question was, yeah. Do you want me to? How do I send the? If I send you the stream, then you'll definitely end up with. We'll definitely end up with feedback. Let me put in the chat here. Nope, there's no chat in Riverside. Oh no, there is. Here we go. Hey people. Oh no, we've got to upgrade the plan for that. So, no, I'll just read out the question again. Okay. From Bradley Chumbo, thank you, Bradley. From Brandi's senior position at Microsoft, what do you actually? I even quite like kind of the bigger one you put right before that, Bradley, relates to it. So, what does Brandi think software engineers should be doing to leverage new AI ML tools? And I guess related to that, what will companies be looking for in software engineers, and what do you look for when you're hiring software engineers, given the changing tools available? So take it away.
I would say I go back to my thing of problem solving, right? Like I would say that's the number one thing that people are looking for. Obviously, let me say this. With large tech companies and maybe like tech startups, your interview process is going to look different, right? But with large tech companies, obviously, there's a lot of like leak code solving. data structures and algorithms. But then also there's this thing that people forget is the system design interviews. So it may be, hey, tell me how to create a Facebook app. And you have to talk about the requirements and like the scalability and things like that. And so those are, I would say, system design interviews and being good at system design interviews are really a game changer. And I think those are things that people sleep on. People just focus on leak code problems all day long, and people forget about the system design interviews. The system design interview, I did really good on my system design interview for Microsoft. And that is the reason why I was able to get up level, because I did well in my system design.
Well, tell us about that, Brandi. Like that. So what was it about system design that was? And sorry, forgive me, but like, what was it about system design that meant you got? Well, it's so interesting. So you got up leveled.
Yeah.
What does that mean for people in the audience? And what is it about being good at system design that puts you on that different level? Because by the way, Codesmith's got to do better at giving that training. I think we have a whole bunch of system design stuff now, more than we did, but we can do better. And so, like, what was it that made you therefore in that next level up? And what is that next level up? What does that mean?
Yes. So let me take a step back. So again, I want to also be transparent. I didn't interview that much at tech startups. So my experience is mainly coming from like the larger tech companies. So I just want to kind of set that context. So with that, at a lot of larger tech companies, right, you have your data structures and algos, but then you also have system design interviews. And so then there's different levels. So specifically with Microsoft, there's 59 and 60, which is like entry level. Then there's 61, 62, which is mid-level. 63, 64 is more senior, and then it keeps going up. So the levels are essentially what level you come in on, right? Whether you're coming in as an entry level engineer, mid-level, or senior level. And Google has the same thing, L3, L4, L5. So that's just what the levels are, what level you come in on. But that also impacts your pay. It impacts the amount of base salary you can negotiate, your sign-on bonus. It impacts the amount of work you'll get. It impacts your bonus. And so you want to do really good on your interviews because you want to obviously get the highest level possible. You want to come in at a higher level. So when I first interviewed for Microsoft, I was interviewing for a 59/60 entry level software engineer role. And I did really good on my data structures and algos, but it was the system design interview that also took place. And essentially a system design interview is essentially, they're just going to ask for you to create some sort of app, right? And it's all about like, how do you strategize? How do you talk about like scalability, like horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, which is, I feel like I'm going to go, I don't want to go too deep into everything, but essentially like scalability, like user requirements. And again, they're not asking you to actually create an app on the spot. It's all about, again, your problem solving, your strategy. Are you thinking about the data requirements? Are you thinking about security, authentication? Are you mentioning all these different things in your system design interview? And again, I think with system design interviews, the reason why I think there's so much like emphasis on it, because one, there's no right or wrong answer, right? It's all about just like, I just want to see how you think. And I think, again, I go back to software engineering. It's so much about like, how do you problem solve? How do you strategize? And so the system design interview was my last round. And the recruiter came back and was like, actually, since you did really well, they want to up level you to 61. So I went in as a mid-level engineer versus an entry-level engineer just because of my interviews. And that's the thing that's really common in a lot of like larger tech companies is depending on how you can apply for a role that's an entry-level role, but if you do really good, they will absolutely up level you. That's very, very common. And so I would even encourage people, don't get so much caught up in the levels when you're applying. It's at least for larger tech companies, because a lot of times if you do really well, they will up level you.
That's brilliant. And look, I'm messed up by taking you off the stream of Bradley's questions, which were, but I was so intrigued by that. But so that was the, what do you look for when you're hiring software engineers? So kind of building on what you were saying there, and in terms of the tools, as they change so quickly, what can software engineers be doing to leverage new tools, AI, ML, but also beyond that?
Yeah, I know. Okay, so AI is the thing, right? Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. And this is the thing I would say. Yes, AI is absolutely the future. It just is. Like, there's no way around that. But also just remember, tech is always changing. And so even within artificial intelligence, there's so many different degrees where there's like machine learning and deep, like there's so many levels to it. So my encouragement would be honestly continue to keep learning, because I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in what's trendy, right? But just remember, like a few years ago, cryptocurrency was the big thing. That was in 2020. Everybody was talking about Bitcoin.
I never bought that. Well, I did, but
it was
I did
everything was talking about blockchain and like, you know, and like NFTs and stuff like that, which is fine. But I would just encourage people to, you have to figure out if you want to be a generalist or if you want to be an expert, right? A generalist is somebody, I feel like I'm more of like a generalist where I have a good bit of knowledge on every single like technology, not every single one, but on a lot of different technologies. Versus some people say like, no, I want to be an expert, meaning like I want to be an expert in artificial intelligence. So I'm going to dive super deep into AI and machine learning and all things, you know, AI. There's others that say, hey, I want to dive deep into cloud computing and Kubernetes and cloud computing and Kubernetes and my microservices, right? And so I think you have to choose if you want to be an expert or a generalist in terms of like, you know, tools and things like that. Because again, like technology is always evolving and trendy. Now, granted, AI is very much here to stay. Like that's just a given. Yeah, but I'm just saying, I think it's easy to feel like, hey, right now I need to go and study what's trendy. But I would say you have to kind of choose, like, what do you want your career to look like? Do you want to dive deep into AI? Do you want to dive deep into mobile? Do you want to dive deep into cloud? Or do you want to be more of a generalist? And so that would be my encouragement. You have to figure out what your T looks like. Is it going to be more so generalist, or do you want to dive deep?
Fabulous answer.
Yeah,
no, go on.
No. I was just going to say, obviously, too. I mean, there's so many like tools to continue to learn. Like ChatGPT and Gemini are great AI tools, obviously. But again, I think I still go back to, you have to decide if you want to be an expert or a generalist.
I completely agree. And the cool thing, what I was thinking about this today, is one doesn't actually need to make that decision permanent, right?
No,
that's kind of, I mean, right? Well, go on.
No, I was going to say too, that's the thing. Like, because again, being a good software engineer is you have to continue to evolve. You have to continue to adapt. So you may go in and think, hey, I want to be a generalist. I want to like, you know all these different technologies. And then the more you learn about certain ones, you're like, hey, actually, I want to dive deeper into this specific one. So that is going to change throughout your career. It's also going to change just depending on what company you work for, right? Because there are certain companies that are really pushing cloud. There are certain companies that's really pushing, like, I don't know, like NFTs and crypto. And so that's going to change, and be okay with that changing. But again, constantly be learning. Like always be learning. That's the number
how
one
badass is that's the like permanent state of being, versus some spaces where it becomes less like ever about, it stops being about what you know or what you could know, and like it becomes increasingly, it does become who you know. And,
absolutely.
And that's a bit of a, I don't know. I think that's when people start to go, ooh,
yeah, because
I mean, start to get a bit stuck.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like when you think about like tech companies in general, I would say at least 60% of people get on at companies because of who they know, to be honest. And so even with that, like learning technologies is great, but I would even put more emphasis on networking and like building out your community. LinkedIn's going to be your best friend. Joining even like software engineer groups in your city. That's also been a huge thing for me, like tech meetups and stuff like that. Because then you learn from other engineers. You learn about what they're learning. You learn about like, okay, what frameworks are you studying or like, learning these days? And so, yes, it's what you know, but also who you know for sure.
Yeah, good point. You're very right. So it was very correct. So on that note, so should we talk a bit about how you've built community, both Codesmith alumni? We started off with the phenomenon that is the crew of people you've sort of encouraged into Codesmith, and now have all gone on to, including your brother, who've all gone on to achieve great things. But what is that? Each of us have to find our community, our the people around us, the sort of, so to speak, crew of people who are our, like-minded people. And that, that's why I went, to be fair, that's actually why I went to coding school 10, 11 years ago, was I wanted to have a group of people in San Francisco. I didn't really know anybody, and, it was game changing for me. So how have you gone about building that? Who are your communities and meetups and groups that you've really prioritized? Because I'm leading here. I know you've done an extraordinary amount here. So share it with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I would first say is when you're getting into tech, when you're like trying to become a software engineer, I think it's so important to really own your career. And what I mean by that is like take control, take charge, right? And put yourself out there. And so that includes like joining the Slack channels. That includes attending workshops and peer programming. That includes community, just like the community meetups in your own city. It also includes like, for me, it has also included, like, again, I mentioned mentoring and giving back, because a lot of times when I go and meet up with like other people or mentor, there's other software engineers, there's other directors there. That's actually how I got my job at Google. It's because I did a meetup. I did it was like a tech meetup for college students. And I went and I, was mentoring college students, and I did like this workshop for college students. And there was a director from Google there randomly, and he like reached out to me on LinkedIn afterwards, and I was like, oh, this is great. And so that's actually how I got my job at Google. It's through mentoring and community meetups. And so I would really encourage people to own your career. Also, LinkedIn is going to be your best friend. Don't be afraid to reach out on LinkedIn to people LinkedIn has this thing where you can do like Google software engineers, Microsoft software engineers, and you can search that. And you can search different software engineers and different companies, reach out to those people, ask them to do virtual coffee chats with you, pick their brains, get insight and tips on the interview process. And so I would say all of that is kind of like the way that I've gone about community. But honestly, it really started with Codesmith CSS Slack channel. That for me has been a huge blessing, because I was able to also reach out to other Codesmith alumni on that Slack channel who had interviewed at Microsoft, which was very beneficial for my interview for Microsoft. So Slack channels, Discords, LinkedIn, community meetups, mentoring, workshops, all of those things are just kind of how I have built my community. But again, I would say own your career, take charge, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many boot camps you go through. It doesn't matter how many mock interviews you do. If you don't own your career, like, it's just not going to happen. It's not. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
And to me, every time you say that, because the mechanic of change is like, well, what is a mechanic of change? Well, sometimes, unfortunately / fortunately, it is just a person saying it repeatedly to people and not stopping doing these kind of events, these kind of workshops you're doing. Yep. And what is great is when you find organizations, and from the sounds of it, you found that at both Microsoft and Google, who then do systematize that. They find the people within the organization who are willing to be those mentors, and they start to provide, genuine space for that. So talk to me a bit about that. How has that mentorship been built in at Microsoft? The work you've done with HBCUs, the work you're now doing at Google. Give me a bit of a sense of how they've maybe provided, or you've encouraged them to perhaps provide that systematized,
I would say, it's fine. I would say, so I feel like a lot of tech companies these days do a good job of partnerships, right? I would say a lot of tech companies in general do that, whether they're partnering with colleges or university, where they're partnering with nonprofits. And so I think for me, just always volunteering, always being willing, because again, it's not just that I'm volunteering just to volunteer. It literally helps me as a software engineer to explain things to people. Like, that is literally so much of being a software engineer, is you breaking things down for your teammates or for your manager, or, doing spec reviews or whatever the case. And so I'm just quick. I'm quick to volunteer. I'm quick to also initiate as well. And that's the other part of being a leader, not just volunteering, but initiating like your own programs. And so I think for me, both at Microsoft, and I just recently joined Google, but already at Google, we recently did like this workshop with a bunch of Odyssey scholars, which is just from a nonprofit. But I was quick to initiate and like, let's come up with this program in the future for them. And again, I think for me, it's something that I'm passionate about in general, like giving back, but specifically being a minority, I think it's even more something that I'm passionate about, just because you don't see many people in this space that look like me, especially in the more technical roles, right? You may see like business people or recruiters, but when it comes to those technical roles, it's very rare to have people of color or women in those roles. And so I think for me, I'm really big on how do I provide space for the next generation, and how do I provide access for the next generation?
I was just looking at this Odyssey scholarship. So this is with U Chicago, is it, or is it maybe even broader across?
Yeah, they have like chapters in different
Yeah.
different, like all around the world. But the one that we was working with was here in Atlanta.
That's amazing. Yeah. So companies are getting better at partnering.
Yep.
So maybe this perhaps with some push. So I guess, how do you go about advocating? How do you, because a bit like you're describing, that you, by staying on the ground, by mentoring yourself, instills in yourself and or in others the mindset to care and to be invested, and therefore the insights, and as you say, it's successful for your own career as well. How do you, when you're advocating for those follow-on projects with Odyssey, for example, how do you help leadership, and if maybe they already get it, but yeah, how do you help leadership stay on the ground themselves so that they continue to see the power, the impact of the work that you can do if you do that? How do you go about creating that movement within what is, in the end, complex, large organizations?
Yeah. Well, I would say I bring it up a lot in like my review sessions. And that's the thing too, like I go back to what do companies look for when it comes to like promotion? And I think sometimes people think they only look for how well you're doing, like just the day-to-day work, but they're also looking for like, oh, how are you impacting your community? Yeah. In fact, specifically, even with Google, I had one of the interviews that you'll have is a Googliness interview where they talk about like, it's all about your leadership skills, like literally the whole round, and every single person, doesn't matter what role you're at Google, you have to take this interview. And it's basically called Googliness, and it's all about your leadership, right? It's literally nothing else, but how are you a leader in your community?
Even in these technical roles.
And even in these technical roles, every single person that has interviewed at Google has to take a Googliness interview, and people actually fail the interview. Like that's a thing. And so that's just as important as your technical skills is like your leadership skills and the way that you are impacting your community. And again, for me, I bring it up and I push it at companies, specifically during my interviews. I always speak on it, but even when I'm actually on the job, I'm bringing it up to my managers. I'm writing it down as like one of my key, like one of the ways that I'm impacting the community in the company. So yeah, I think for me, I'm just constantly voicing not just how important it is, but how I live it out as well. And so I think it's a huge thing that people underestimate, is like sometimes people can just focus on the technical skills and they don't always focus on how can I develop my non-technical skills as well, because those are just as important as your technical skills.
Fantastic. And as you described, I love the point you said there, and that you're living it out, because that gives such power to, the advocacy, to the expectations that you place on all expectations, the encouragement. It's hard to, not for organizations to not get excited by the ability to move projects like the Odyssey Scholars further forward. We've got questions here from Alex James. I'm going to my podcast hosting voice here. So okay. Alex asks, why did you go straight to FANG after Codesmith and not a startup? And then also talk about how you made the jump from Microsoft to Google in more detail, please.
Okay, so why did I go to FANG? I don't know if it was just like, hey, I only want to go to FANG. To be honest, they were the companies that were like reaching back out to me. Like I was having such a hard time with tech startups because they were like, oh, because my degree is in public health, where it's like with a lot of large tech companies, they don't even like ask about your degree. And it was like, it's a common thing. It's just like, I don't know if it's because such like the focus is such on data structures and algorithms and leak code, but they didn't really like mention anything about degrees. They were all about, can you pass our technical interview? That's all we want to know. Whereas like with tech startups, they were like, your degree is in public health. And I was like, yes, it is. But let me show you, you know what I mean? And so I honestly, for me, tech startups just didn't give me a chance, if I could just be honest. Whereas like FANG companies did, or like the largest tech companies did. And so that's one of the reasons why I went. But then also I think, I don't know, I would say there's pros and cons to both. And I know that Alex didn't ask this question, but I just want to put that out there. There's pros and cons to both. I think that the impact that you make at a tech startup is a lot larger. Whereas like with a FANG type company, there's going to be 20 people working on one feature. And that feature may just be like a button, you know, or like a push. I mean, it's like 20 of us working on one little thing. And so your impact is not always as big. And so that's something to think about too. And that's something that at times I've like struggled with, if I can be honest, because I like to like feel like my achievements are like super big and like impactful. And so I think you really have to fight to show your impact at larger tech companies, whereas at tech startups, it's a lot more noticeable because again, you're probably like the only engineer working on one feature. I know Alex, you didn't ask that, but I'm just like speaking on that. Just those are things to think about. But then also the last thing I would say too is the compensation, right? Like all tech companies are going to pay well. Tech startups pay really well. The only difference is the stock. Your stock is going to look a little different. So with FANG companies, you're probably going to get less stock at times, but it's going to already be worth something, right? Whereas like tech startup, they're willing to give you more equity in the company, but unless they IPO, it won't be worth anything. But if they do IPO, you can make a huge come up.
Buying a house.
You can buy a house, because I had a friend who got on at Snowflake, and Snowflake is a cloud computing company. They were a cloud computing tech startup, and they IPO'd, and he got on before they IPO'd, and he made a lot of money once they IPO'd and went public. And so that's another thing I would say is like there's pros and cons. It's like higher risk but higher reward, you know. And then his other question was talk about the transition from Microsoft to Google. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm going to add, did Codesmith guidance continue to help you in that?
Oh, absolutely. yes, they did. So I reached back out to some of my fellow Codesmith alumni who worked at Google, because I knew 2 people that worked at Google that had graduated from Codesmith, and I reached out to them directly for insights and for tips, and to give me a mock interview, because that's really important. But my transition from Microsoft to Google happened. I mean, honestly, I had worked at Microsoft for 3 years, and I think I was just ready to make more money. Honestly, like I hate to say it, but like, and when you work for tech companies, you end up making more money when you switch. Like that's just the reality. Obviously, you don't want to like always be job hopping, but I think for me, I was still like early on in my tech career, and I was like, okay, I think I'm ready now to make more money. And you always make more money when you go to another company. And so the transition.
The own your career point you were making. The own your career point.
Yes, to own your career. And so so again, I got connected to this director at Google who I had. He was like telling me that he was like hiring for a role. But then I reached out to like a few people that I knew at Codesmith, and they helped me to do mock interviews. And I went through the process, and I got on. And I think for me, the transition might have been a little easier because I already had worked at Microsoft and I already knew what to expect. I already knew what to expect. But I think, my transition was pretty smooth. Again, I go back to community. It's so important. I just did a whole bunch of mock interviews. I did have like a coding assessment, which honestly, I don't know why tech companies do data structures and algorithms. Because honestly, when you're on the job, whether you're a software engineer, whether you're a TPM, no one's actually creating a data structure in their day-to-day job. That's so rare that you're ever doing that. But again, that's just, I think it's more so like, we just want to see how you technically problem solve. So
the system design one though, even the system design, are you really constantly, are you designing Facebook? No. Are you
No,
designing
no, no.
Wikipedia, the favorite one? No.
It's all about like your strategy, right? It's all about like, we just want to see, how do you technically problem solve? How do you strategize? How do you technically communicate? And another thing I would say too is, and I know, Alex, you didn't ask this, but recording yourself is really important. Like when I say recording yourself, like when you're doing mock interviews, when you're solving data structures and algorithms, when you're doing a mock interview for a system design interview, record yourself so you can know how you sound, and so you can know what type of things you need to work on, and how you're communicating your solutions. So that's really important as well. Just record yourself.
You have no idea how much longer one's pauses or energy or all these things. It's wild.
Yeah.
Because we all go into this kind of special mode for interviews that is, and the more you can get comfortable with being, the fuller version of yourself, hopefully, the better. I think my theory on the data structures algorithms thing is that when it was mostly computer science people going into software engineering, it was like, if we just want to test your problem solving, we will use a domain of knowledge that in theory you should know roughly. You did the degree, and then we'll combine up in interesting ways to see how you handle the unknown of how it's being combined up, much like we do for Codesmith. Like we only interview on like closure, object-oriented programming, like core JavaScript principles, but it allows us to know, we know you know this knowledge, so let's see how, when we kind of play with it a bit, you can handle, the change and be creative. The problem is, now, as rightly, to be fair, as one of the comments said, the number one intake major to Codesmith is actually technically computer science, but most people don't. It's under 10%. So most people going out of Codesmith, and many people going to software engineering didn't do a computer science degree, and then they're suddenly told that the domain of knowledge that you're assumed to kind of low-key know is this, as you say, and not even that useful day to day. Somewhat, but so it's a bit of and that kind of, I would be curious, how do you think about that? One of the questions in there, which was quite direct, but maybe just generally think about this. How does one think about I don't even want to tee it up as not having a computer science degree. How does one think about the fact that there might be still some even if it's in our heads, which I don't think it is, skepticism about people in industry or from people in industry about coding boot camps, not least Codesmith? How does one think about that? How do you think about that? How do we change that? Is it worth changing? Should we try and change it? The mentality. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting enough because, like, again, when I was interviewing, I didn't really mention I went through a coding boot camp. Like, no one really knew that. It was just based off of like I don't know if they didn't ask, and I didn't really mention it. But I think it's more so about how you frame yourself, like how do you kind of frame your story. And that is one thing that I will say. I honestly, truthfully appreciate Codesmith for teaching us how to like create and own our story. Because I think a huge issue is what I've seen even from people that were interviewing at Microsoft and at Google who come from boot camps, they talk and they talk like they're junior engineers. Whereas like one thing I really appreciate was Codesmith really taught us how to like speak like you are already a software engineer. So this emphasis of, it wasn't, when I was like throughout my interview process, it wasn't, hey, my name is Brandi, and I'm looking to become a software engineer. It was like, no, my name is Brandi and I am a software engineer and I have experience in React and so I think like the way that I go back to owning your career, the way that you talk about your story and frame your story really matters. And I think when you do that, you won't always feel this like, oh my gosh, I went to a boot camp, is it bad? And another thing I would say too, and I don't know if people realize this, but some of my colleagues, both at Microsoft and Google, who have computer science degrees, they actually did not know how to fully, like, they weren't like the best coders before they started at our jobs. Because something that they told me, which I didn't know, was for their computer science degrees, a lot of them weren't necessarily taking a whole bunch of coding classes. Like they might have taken like 1 or 2 Java classes, but a lot of times with their computer science degree, they were learning computer science theory and like the foundation. But they were doing on a
whiteboard. They were doing on a whiteboard, like a certain, like a certain person who also is not very good at the actual writing of it.
They weren't necessarily like coding throughout those all 4 years of their degree. And I think that's a misconception. And so, yes, they do sometimes, it can feel like, man, they have the upper hand still because they still have a computer science degree. And obviously that's always beneficial. But I think when people think about, again, the technical problem solving piece, it's not like they were like technically problem solving throughout those whole 4 years. It's like a lot of them got better through leak code and practicing problems for their actual interviews. So a lot of the learning and the studying really came through your interview process, if I can be completely honest. And so I don't know if that was the question.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I think it's again, it's like one needs to build stories for oneself about the how and why of, you know, for example, the prejudice of computer science maybe being more legitimate. One needs to build stories and understand why that's not the case. And so, so you know, you asked it to answer the question. You bet it does, because it's working out the why and story behind actually why there is no greater legitimacy, or it's valuable, as you say, but you know, there isn't a unique legitimacy. Okay, look, we have already gone over. We've had wonderful comments, wonderful engagement and discussion. I don't know, people. I am very, very grateful to Brandi, but I'm personally grateful to Brandi because it's a chance for, you know, it's always, as Brandi shared, it's a permanent state of owning one's career, owning the story, owning one's trajectory as a software engineer. And we have to, as an organization, Codesmith, continue to do that as well. So it's something that resonates a lot with me, Brandi. And so when you tell your story of all the things you've achieved and the edge that you have, just for a personal level, you know, I don't have any permanent evidence of it. It's, you know, people question left and right, as everyone has a right to do so. So when you tell your story like this, and when you advocate, it also, you know, empowers me. Sounds silly, but it does. Let alone, as you say, people who are on this journey. So I hope that, you know, people in the audience feel suitably, you know, grateful and inspired. Thank you so much, Brandi. Are there any closing words or thoughts you want to share?
I would just encourage people to. I know, like right now in the tech market, people can look and be like, "Oh my gosh, like it's crazy." I want to encourage people. Software engineers are honestly the bread and butter of almost every tech company, and so there are still so many software engineer roles that are out there. Yes, there are layoffs happening, but when you really look at the positions that are being laid off, there's not a whole lot of software engineers being laid off, right? Layoffs are happening, but it's like, honestly, which I hate to say, but it's like recruiters and like in roles like that, which are very important. But unfortunately, when people look at like tech companies, they look at software engineers as the bread and butter. And so honestly, the average tech company will do everything in their power to hold on to their software engineers. And so there are still so many software engineer roles that are out there. LinkedIn will be your absolute best friend, though. Like, definitely don't be afraid to reach out. You know, build that community, and just like, again, own your career and own your story, and speak like you are already a software engineer. So,
thank you so much, Brandi. We've already got comments here saying, please do this again. I would love to do so. And Brandi, thank you. Thank you for all you've done as a mentor at Codesmith. And thank you to our audience as well. I think we are over and out.
Okay, bye. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody. How do we turn this off? There.